The question on the European continent for 150 years has been whether to appease evil, to give evil what it wants in the hope that evil will then suddenly become good or at least non-offensive, or whether to fight evil and allow others to fight evil. That battle did not end with World War II. That battle is ongoing. So on Wednesday, Ireland, Norway, and Spain all said that they would recognize a Palestinian state. And the Taoiseach, which is the Prime Minister of Ireland, a guy named Simon Harris, announced this new move.
Last month I stood on these same steps with Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, and we said that the point of recognizing the State of Palestine was coming closer. That point has now arrived. Today, Ireland, Norway, and Spain are announcing that we recognize the State of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision.
Okay, let's make very clear. They are just rewarding Hamas. So on October 6th, none of these states recognized a Palestinian state because, as we'll discuss in a moment, there is no Palestinian state. It exists like Narnia exists, or more appropriately, like Mordor exists. The Palestinian state does not exist. It does not have a government. It doesn't have borders. It doesn't have citizenship. Now, let's put aside all of this nonsense about how the modern world is all about self-determination, because none of these people are stumping for an independent Kurdistan, for example. I noticed that Spain, which is standing right there, they're not talking about an independent Catalonia. They're not talking about Basque independence. So self-determination is not the key issue here. The truth is that normally when a state is established through force of arms, typically speaking. That's been true throughout human history. And then once that state can hold its own, then people either recognize it or don't recognize it. But the real question as to whether other countries should recognize a state or stump for a state has to do with what that state will look like afterward. We know exactly what a Palestinian state would look like afterward because we can see it in action right now. Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005, and the Palestinians proceeded to elect Hamas, and then Hamas proceeded to kill many of its opponents. And the Palestinians, by and large, support Hamas. And they turned Hamas turned the Gaza Strip into the world's most nefarious terror state, filled with literally hundreds of kilometers of terror tunnels and rockets and sophisticated drones and ammunition. Now, again, all of this is symbolic. Okay, it doesn't matter what Ireland says. It doesn't matter what Spain says. It doesn't matter what Norway says. I will note that all three of these countries were neutral during World War II. So, neutral on the Nazis. I guess they missed their opportunity to just openly side with them the first time, so now they're going to side with today's Nazis in Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and Islamic Jihad and all the rest. But this is all symbolic because, of course, there are like 140 countries that currently, quote-unquote, recognize a state of Palestine, but there is no state of Palestine because, again, in order to have a state, you actually have to have, typically, a government, borders, and citizenship. And there is no Palestinian state that has any of these things. Okay, let's start with the prospect of a government. Typically, if you're going to recognize a state, the state has to have a government. Who governs the quote-unquote state of Palestine? A state of Palestine that, by the way, the ICC not only recognizes, but is now acting on behalf of when it seeks to prosecute a non-member, the Prime Minister of Israel. So who would the government be? We'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, in America, we are incredibly fortunate to have brave men and women who volunteer to serve in the military. They dedicate their lives to protecting our freedom and ensuring our nation's security. These men and women voluntarily lay their lives on the line for us. But when their service ends, transitioning to civilian life can be really rough, especially given the current economic climate. That's why Pure Talk proudly supports the America's Warrior Partnership. Since 2014, America's Warrior Partnership has worked with tens of thousands of veterans in its quest to stop veteran suicide and help veterans and their families live the purposeful lives they deserve. You can join the fight. New customers who switch over to Pure Talk can make a one-time donation matched dollar for dollar by Pure Talk or round up their initial order at checkout. If you're already a Pure Talk customer, you can also make recurring donations by rounding up your monthly bill. Head on over to puretalk.com/Shapiro to make the switch. Choose a wireless company that shares your values and is half the price of Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile. Visit puretalk.com/Shapiro to upgrade your cell phone service to America's most dependable 5G network. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, puretalk.com/Shapiro. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro. According to polling data, before October 7th, Fatah, which is the military arm of the Palestinian Authority, was barely more popular than Hamas with regard to the West Bank. But today, Hamas would actually defeat Fatah in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. in the Gaza Strip, that Hamas is wildly popular. 59% of all Palestinians think Hamas should rule Gaza. 70% were satisfied with the role that Hamas has played during the war. Even among people who believed before October 7th that Fatah should win, they believed, 56%, that the person who should lead a Palestinian government is a man named Marwan Barghouti, who is serving multiple life sentences for his role in the murder of Jews during the Second Intifada. So let's be clear, it would be a terror government. But the reality is that no one treats the actual terror government of Hamas as a government, because typically governments are responsible for the safety and well-being of their citizens, correct? What is Hamas doing? Nobody treats Hamas as the government of Gaza, including the Europeans. If they did, all blame for humanitarian problems in Gaza would fall on Hamas. But the entire European infrastructure, including the ICC, is placing blame for the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip on Israel. They're expecting Israel to ship in humanitarian aid. Now, nobody has made the argument, among all the myriad human rights arguments that are made about Russia and its human rights violations in Ukraine, nobody has made the argument that Russia is not shipping humanitarian aid into Ukraine. They won't even make that argument about Russia. But they're making that argument about Israel, despite the fact that they now apparently recognize a sovereign state of Palestine in some bizarre way. In fact, the government of Palestine, were there to be one, routinely steals aid from its own people. How much aid do they steal from their own people? Well, you get to pay for it, which is really exciting. One of the wonderful things about American Middle Eastern foreign policy is that you generally are funding both sides of every war in the Middle East. We, the American taxpayers, are funding Iran and we're funding Israel. We're funding Hamas and we're funding Israel. We're funding Hezbollah via the proxy of Iran and we're funding Israel. That's the way that it works in the Middle East because we are idiots. And so now we're doing it on a directly. So the Biden administration, in all of its extraordinary wisdom, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build a pier in the Mediterranean off the coast of the Gaza Strip with the supposed attempt to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Right? That's the basic attempt. There's only one problem, and there's been the problem throughout. The minute that the aid enters an area that Hamas has control over, Hamas steals the aid. The problem has never been Israeli willingness to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, food for the civilians in Gaza. That has never remotely been the problem. In fact, over the course of this conflict, Israel has shipped in thousands of calories per day per Palestinian civilian into the Gaza Strip. There actually is no mass starvation in the Gaza Strip by any available metric. It doesn't matter. The United States decided we're going to build this pier, and we're going to pretend that the real obstacle to getting the aid in was somehow the Israeli government, which is the only force in the region attempting to get aid in. In fact, the Kerem Shalom crossing, which Israel now controls near Rafah, the Kerem Shalom crossing and the Rafah crossing are both being attacked by Hamas in order to maintain the blockade against humanitarian aid getting in. In fact, the Pentagon even admitted this. The Pentagon actually came out and admitted this. Here's Pentagon Major General Patrick Ryder openly acknowledging that despite the fact that 569 metric tons of aid had passed through the U.S.-built pier, 0 had reached actual Palestinian civilians. All of it had gone to Hamas. This is the Pentagon admitting that. Those are your taxpayers. So where's the government? I thought that there was a government. If you're going to recognize the state of Palestine, it's got to have a Palestinian. Where's the government? Why aren't you holding that government to account? Here's the Pentagon acknowledging the failure.
Am I accurate to say 0 has been delivered to the people of Gaza so far?
You'd have to check with the World Food Program. I know that aid is getting in, but it's not accurate that no aid has been delivered. You know, we've been doing airdrops. We've been helping to facilitate aid coming over the land crossings. But the Causeway has been able to get over 569 metric tons of aid into Gaza for onward delivery. So, yes, very shortly, I think you'll see aid starting to be delivered.
That has been delivered, right? As of today?
As of today, I do not believe so.
No aid has been delivered up until today. And the Pentagon acknowledges some of that initial aid that was brought in as it was being taken along a transportation route was intercepted by some people who took that aid off those vehicles. Who could those people be? Who could those people be? Where is the government of the state of Palestine? Where is it? Hilariously, members of the media, left-wingers like Chris Hayes, are astonished and befuddled that the aid is being stolen by Hamas because, of course, he's a cretin. Lara Seligman said, Ryder says, I do not believe any of the aid that's been delivered through the pier has actually gotten to the people of Gaza. And Chris Hayes is like, wait, what? That's what he tweeted out. Wait, what? Right, because you're a dullard. Everyone has known this for legitimately months. Because once again, the terrorist entity that runs the Gaza Strip is not anything like a government that you would want to recognize as a government. So when you say you recognize a state of Palestine, who's the government? Who's the government? There is no government other than terror groups. You are literally acknowledging a terror state in the aftermath of a slaughter on October 7th. What you are basically saying is go slaughter Jews and get a state. Go slaughter, kill, maim Jews and get a state. That is the logic of Ireland, Norway, and Spain. It's absolutely incredible. This Palestinian state, this supposedly recognized Palestinian state, which, by the way, again, there are lots of countries that already, quote unquote, recognize a Palestinian state. Sweden did it in 2014. Poland did it in 1988. There still is no Palestinian state because typically a state has to have, government, borders, and citizenship. The reason there is no Palestinian state, as everyone who has ever studied this conflict knows and is honest about, is because no Palestinian entity ever has accepted any sort of partition plan with regard to the land of Israel. None. It has never happened, ever. Let's go through the maps just to remind everybody. We'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, political betting with BetOnline. It's a lot of fun. You can wager on real-world events like the outcome of the presidential election, or whether Hunter Biden will serve jail time before 2025, or will Joe Biden complete his full first term in office. That's an interesting bet. I was looking on BetOnline today. I saw that President Biden and President Trump have equal odds of winning the White House in November. That's a bit of a surprise because I think that Trump is a pretty good bet. But they've also got tons of betting options for the traditional sports dude. BetOnline makes sports betting more accessible and convenient than ever. With just a few clicks, you can place bets on your favorite teams or events from the comfort of your own home. BetOnline prides themselves on their higher than average betting limits of up to $25,000. You can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So, while you're watching your favorite team or the news on upcoming elections, why not spice things up with a friendly wager with BetOnline? Go to betonline.ag to place your bets today. Use promo code BEN for a 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN. BetOnline. The options are endless. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN for that 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. So, here is a map of the Peel Commission plan rejected by the Arabs. Okay, so this is the Peel Commission. This is when there's British Mandate Palestine. Okay, British Mandate Palestine. The Peel Commission originally, before the Peel Commission, during the Balfour Declaration, if you go all the way back in British history to like 1919, Balfour Declaration suggested that a Jewish state or a Jewish national homeland would be established in Israel and what is today Jordan. And then the British government sliced off Jordan. It was then called Transjordan. And they said this would be the Arab state. And then, under Arab pressure, because there were massive attacks on Jews and British soldiers by Arabs in the intervening period, by 1937, the Peel Commission proposed a partition plan. That partition plan would have left under British rule a corridor from Jaffa to Jerusalem. That would have been under British rule. And then virtually the entirety of the land of Israel, the modern state of Israel, would have been an Arab state, ranging all the way in the north from nearly Lake Tiberias all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba. You would have a split Jewish state that contained like Rehovot in the south and went up to like Tzfat in the north. It was a remnant rump state. The Jews accepted this. The Arabs rejected it. Then in 1947, the British they put it before the UN. The UN presented a partition plan in 1947. Again, a rump Jewish state with indefensible borders. Absolutely indefensible borders. The proposed Jewish state would have sliced off not only the Gaza Strip, but a large segment of the south of Israel. Israel would have been left with basically the Negev Desert, a corridor from Tel Aviv to Haifa. Jerusalem would have been an international zone. The entirety of the West Bank, larger than the West Bank actually currently, would have been an Arab state, plus parts of northern Israel. That was the plan presented in 1947 by the United Nations. The Jews accepted the plan, the Arabs rejected the plan, and proceeded to launch an attack in 1948. That attack in 1948 ended with Israel controlling slightly more territory than it would have if the Arabs had actually just acknowledged the UN Partition Plan of 1947. Here is a map of what happened in 1948. Attacks from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Was all those armies simultaneously attacked the nascent state of Israel. The nascent state of Israel fought back. they ended up with control of what looks like what is now called the Green Line borders, right? The pre-1967 borders. Now, during the intervening period, 1948 to 1967, Arabs controlled what would now be the quote-unquote Palestinian state, including Jordan controlling the so-called West Bank. Jordan restricted religious activities in Jerusalem. Jordan made UNRWA the entire area of the West Bank. The Gaza Strip, of course, had no Jews. It was controlled by Egypt. There was no clamor for an independent Palestinian state. In fact, the Palestine Liberation Organization to liberate Palestine was directed against the state of Israel and founded in 1964, when all of the current quote-unquote borders of the state of Palestine were under Arab control. Again, a state of Palestine was always a Trojan horse to destroy the state of Israel. That's what it always was, and it is what it remains. That is why the Arabs never accepted any sort of partition plan, ever. So after 1948, again, this is when the Arabs are now in control of what is currently called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. There is no independent Palestinian state, not even one is proposed by Jordan or by Egypt. So then, 1967 war, the Arabs, under a pan-Arab movement led by Nasser, decide to mobilize. Israel preemptively strikes Egypt, and after the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, Israel ends up in control of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Desert, all the way up to the Suez Canal. That is the land that Israel ends up winning in a war that it did not want. And that, what you'll see in the history of this conflict, Arabs routinely reject peace plans, launch war against Israel, get their asses kicked, and then whine about it and demand that they get the land back. That is the constant pattern throughout this history. If ever once a peace plan had been accepted and then simply lived through and developed, and any Arab state, Palestinian state, Jordan or Egypt had just decided, you know what, we're going to develop the land that we currently hold and create working economies and functional societies, as opposed to directing all of this as a Trojan horse to destroy the Jewish state. Everything would have been hunky-dory. They didn't, and so the conflict remains ongoing. Hey, that's the borders after 67. In 1973, the Arabs, this time, led by Anwar Sadat in Egypt, they decide that they're going to launch a surprise attack on Israel. Israel ends up, again, gaining slightly more territory than it would have had before the Yom Kippur War, which was an attempted war to destroy the state of Israel yet again. Okay, so in the early 1990s, the Oslo Peace Accords are signed, idiotic plan by Israel to now try to negotiate another peace deal. So the entire Sinai, by the way, is now in Egyptian hands. It was sliced off under the Camp David Accords in the late 1970s, 1978, under Jimmy Carter, president of the United States, and Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, finding that perfect sleep aid, it can feel like uncovering a hidden treasure. Whether you're struggling with occasional insomnia or battling chronic sleep disturbances, that right sleep aid, it can make all the difference in the world, which is why you should check out Beam's Dream Powder. Beam is not just your run-of-the-mill sleep aid. It's a concoction carefully crafted to help you slip into the sweet embrace of rest without the grogginess that often accompanies other sleep remedies. I've talked about producer Savvy before and how often she uses Beam's Dream Powder. It's awesome, correct, Savvy?
It is. I've tried almost everything, and this is the only thing that actually has me feeling refreshed when I wake up. And I can't pronounce all these names, so that's all you've been.
Oh, sounds good. Let's do it. Beam Dream Powder contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Today, my listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, their best-selling hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Beam has delicious flavors like cinnamon cocoa, chocolate peanut butter, mint chip. Better sleep has never tasted better. Just mix some Beam Dream into hot water or milk. You stir or froth and enjoy before bedtime. Go check them out right now. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, take advantage of 40% off for a limited time when you head on over to shopbeam.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Ben with my promo code Ben for up to 40% off your order. And so, Israel gives up the entire Sinai Desert for an agreement of peace with the Egyptians. So that land goes away. Then the Oslo Accords. So the Oslo Accords happen, and effectively speaking, the Oslo Accords agree to a certain number of areas. There's going to be a gradual definition of the borders of a Palestinian state predicated on a series of steps being followed, including the establishment of some sort of durable peace. That is the plan under Oslo. And of course, Israel was idiotic to sign this because the person on the other side of the table was arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat, a mass murdering piece of shit. So, Israel foolishly signs the Oslo Accords, which has been a bloody nightmare for them ever since. This established what were called areas A, B, and C in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Area A was under sole Palestinian control. Area B was under mixed Israeli and Palestinian security control. And Area C was not under Palestinian control at all. Right? That was the way that the Accords worked. That's the way the Oslo Accords worked. There had been no final definition of borders. In 2000, Ehud Barak, a far-left Israeli prime minister, I mean extremely far-left Israeli prime minister, he made a proposal. This proposal would have allowed for annexation of largely Jewish areas in the West Bank in return for land swaps that would come from the state of Israel to a Palestinian state. There'd be a corridor between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, essentially a highway between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The State of Palestine would then be very close to looking like what the borders looked like between 1948 and 1967. Except in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, those would now be controlled by the Palestinian Authority. That was turned down by Yasser Arafat. He said no. And then he walked away and he started the so-called Second Intifada, a violent uprising that ended up killing thousands of Israelis. And the reason he walked away from that deal, despite the richness of the deal, as Bill Clinton has suggested, the president of the time and no great friend of Israel, the reason he walked away from the deal is because, again, there is no desire for an actual partition plan on the part of Palestinians. They want all of it. There is a reason October 7th is popular. That is why when European countries say, we recognize a state of Palestine without borders, what they are really recognizing is an attempt to destroy the state of Israel and kill all the Jews living in it. Because that is the actual desire of the governing entities in the Palestinian Authority and in the Gaza Strip in Hamas. Okay, so that was the 2000 Camp David proposal. Then, in 2008, Ehud Olmert, heretofore a sort of centrist figure, made a desperate plan in an attempt to get a peace deal. So he made a 2008 proposal that would have split sovereignty over Jerusalem. Areas of East Jerusalem would have been transferred to the nascent state of Palestine. There would have been a handover of the entirety of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians. There would have been a handover of pretty much the entirety of the West Bank to the Palestinians with land swaps to account for the fact that there are Jews who live in historically Judea and Samaria. And the reason I say the so-called West Bank is because the term West Bank is about 70 years old. The terms Judea and Samaria are literally thousands of years old, and you can find them in the Bible. And so you're talking about cities of hundreds of thousands of people. There's about 700, 800,000 Jews who live in the West Bank because those are historically Jewish areas. Okay, the Palestinians under Mahmoud Abbas, do not even issue a counteroffer. Mahmoud Abbas just walks away from the table. So when I say that recognizing a state of Palestine means it's a state without borders, it's not that Israel has not tried to establish borders. It's that the Palestinians don't want to define borders, because the moment they define a border, then they can no longer act as a Trojan horse against Israel. Because the reality is this: the Palestinian leadership, I'm not talking about some members of the Palestinian population, although again, by polling data, they support their leadership and they support the genocidal goal of the destruction of the state of Israel. The Palestinian leadership does not want a state. The reason they do not want a state along partition lines is because at that point, the Trojan horse game is over. Because what they've always said they want are two things. They have said that they supposedly want a partition plan, which they've never defined, never accepted, and never specified. And then they have suggested they want a quote-unquote right of return. A right of return means that any Arab who left or was expelled during the 1947-48 War of Independence in the state of Israel, they would all, along with their descendants, be allowed to move back into a state they wish to destroy. That is the idea. We'll get to that in just a second. First, dudes, it's just a basic fact of reality. There are a lot of dudes who are suffering from ED. They don't really want to talk about it, but it is a problem. You should go get it solved. So, have you heard of Rosparks? This dual action prescription merges the powerhouse ingredients found in generic Viagra and Cialis, sildenafil and tadalafil into one formidable treatment. But it's not merely about what's inside them, it's about the mode of delivery. Rosparks leverages the benefits of sublingual administration, meaning the tablet dissolves under your tongue. which means that it absorbs fast into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system, which means, again, a quicker onset of action, reducing the wait time typically associated with traditional ED pills. Moreover, tadalafil stays in your system for up to 36 hours. With Rospark's spontaneity is back on the table. Connect with a provider at ro.co/Ben to see if Rosparks is right for you. That's ro.co/Ben. Again, that's ro.co/Ben. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Only available if prescribed after an online consultation with a provider. Now, 850,000 Jews were expelled or left various Arab countries in the region between 1948 and 1967 and moved to Israel. These were refugees that Israel took in. Not only have the Arab states not taken in Palestinian refugees, they still call them refugee camps. We are 70 years later. None of these current states, like Ireland, Spain, Norway, Hungary, Poland, none of them have suggested that because they recognize the state of Palestine. You know what isn't a refugee camp? A city in a state that is yours. That is no longer a refugee camp. But every one of these entities still terms all of these people refugees. How can you be a refugee in your own state? So if you acknowledge the state, how can you simultaneously say its citizens are refugees? They are no longer refugees, especially when you're talking about, in many cases, the great grandkids of people who left because they didn't want to be in the way of a conflict as Arab armies stormed into Israel in 1947-48. That's total insanity. Population movement has been a constant throughout human history. You never hear about a quote-unquote right of return for populations that move during wartime or are expelled during wartime. That is generally not a thing, but that has been kept alive specifically in order to destroy the state of Israel. And this is why you don't see any of the countries that acknowledge a state of Palestine say, well, okay, now that you have a state of Palestine, which we've acknowledged, you don't get to go and demand citizenship in the state that you wish to destroy next door. That's not a thing. But here is the UNRWA map of so-called refugee camps in the area. Okay, the UNRWA is basically a front group for Hamas. It is an agency of the United Nations that is devoted specifically and only, it's the Relief and Works Agency, it is devoted specifically and only to Palestinian refugees. 80 years later. And if you look at the map of these so-called refugee camps, you're looking at refugee camps that are not refugee camps. You're talking about Jabalia. That is a major city. You're talking about Nablus. That is a major city. These are not refugee camps. These are cities. These are cities in a so-called state of Palestine. So you can't have it both ways. Either you acknowledge a state of Palestine, which means you have to define a government. The people of Palestine are now citizens of a state of Palestine that you say you recognize, which means they cannot demand citizenship in another state that they have no connection with in order to destroy it. But again, all of this is malarkey. All of this is nonsense. The reality is that many of the states that are currently acknowledging a state of Palestine, the reason they are doing this is because they believe that Israel is a cancer in the region and they wish to see it extirpated, but they don't want to say that out loud. And they're perfectly willing to facilitate terrorism because that's what it is. A massive terror. Again, none of the countries that just said that they acknowledge a state of Palestine, zero of them acknowledged a state of Palestine on October 6th. After Hamas commits an atrocity, that's when they say, okay, now you get a state. That's the way this works. You deserve a state. You killed enough Jews. You maimed enough Jews. Now you deserve a state. Now, is that going to facilitate peace in the region? Not on your life. Do you think that the Saudis are interested in a Palestinian state? They certainly are not. They have to say that they are because obviously their population hates Israel. But the Saudi leadership has zero interest in a state of Palestine that becomes an Iranian proxy state directed against it near its own borders. Of course, they're not interested in that, which is why the Saudis openly said recently that they're desperately attempting to yell at the Biden administration, please stop pressuring for a Palestinian state. Stop it. We will normalize if you just shut the hell up. But Joe Biden won't because, again, he is part of this broader idiotic notion that when a Palestinian state is magically established, all conflict in the Middle East goes away, which is absolutely asinine. The vast majority of conflict in the Middle East, if you're counting dead, wounded, every war, has nothing to do with Israel or the Palestinians. Check out the Iran-Iraq war or the conflict in Syria or ISIS or the takeover of Lebanon by Iran, if you don't believe me. War is a pretty constant feature of the region, actually, as it turns out. The Saudis don't care about this. How do you know this? Because the Wall Street Journal literally reported that the state would be willing to accept a verbal agreement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he'd be willing to renew talks for Palestinian statehood. That's all they wanted, like a fig leaf. And the Biden administration wasn't willing to let it go at that. So they're trying to pressure Israel to make concessions to a terror entity in the middle of a war against the terror entity. Meanwhile, would it facilitate peace for there to be a Palestinian state, say, in control of its own borders? Absolutely not, considering those borders have been used to facilitate terrorism. The reason why Egypt has been so angry about Israel going into Rafah, which borders Egypt, is because they are afraid, and they are correct to be afraid, that Israel is going to discover massive, gigantic tunnels going from Egypt into the Gaza Strip. Tunnels for funneling out Hamas fighters and for funneling in weaponry. Recently, it was revealed that the country of Turkey is hosting 1,000 wounded Hamas fighters. So you ask yourself, how did they get out? The answer is they got out through that border. The reason the Egyptians are ticked off is because the Egyptians have a serious terror threat in the Sinai Desert. They've basically been allowing that to fester, grow, and direct itself against Israel. If Israel shuts down that border in a serious way by closing off the tunnels, right now it's basically a one-way border. Supplies are going into Hamasistan in the Gaza Strip, but you're not getting mass population moving out into Egypt because Egypt doesn't want any of those people. In fact, Egypt has a gigantic wall on that side of the border. We should take some lessons from them on our own southern border. But Egypt, like many of these other countries, feels held hostage by a wing of radicals who are inside the country, and so they're happy to facilitate terrorism. Do you think it gets better or worse with a Palestinian state? We all know the answer to this, which is why Hamas issued a thank you. Hamas issued a really nice thank you to these countries. Hamas put out the following statement: the recognition of a Palestinian state by Norway, Spain, and Ireland is the fruit of the struggle and the resistance. Yes, indeedy do. The Europeans, as it turns out, appeasement never ended. Or maybe it's something worse than appeasement. Maybe it's appeasement because they believe that if they just give terrorists enough that they'll be left alone. And Spain has a history of this. In the aftermath of a massive terror attack in Spain, the Spanish government decided it would no longer support the war in Iraq, not on principle, but out of fear of the terrorists. So it could just be appeasement, or it could be something significantly worse, which is a belief that really it would be better for the world if the Palestinians, including Hamas, achieve their goal. Now, in the United States, the reaction has been somewhat fascinating because the Republican Party obviously thinks this is idiotic. The Democratic Party is split. The Democratic Party wants to agree with Ireland, Norway, Spain. They want to agree with them, but there's still a wing of the Democratic Party that acknowledges that a state of Palestine has no government other than terrorists, no borders that even the Palestinians will define, and no citizenry that they will define as citizens of the state sufficient that they don't try to swamp the state of Israel with a bunch of people who want to destroy it. So the Democratic Party is split. We'll get into that in just one moment. First, ladies and gents, this is the reason why we say do not miss Backstage. We promised a surprise from Jeremy Boring. He did deliver. He shocked the world. He premiered Jeremy's Razors, the second greatest commercial ever. If you missed it, take a look right now.
Oh, hey, I'm Jeremy Boring, CEO of Daily Wire and founder of Jeremy's Razors. Woke razor companies love to take your money while trampling on your values. Me, I just love your money.
Cut! What the hell is this?
Hey, nobody calls cut on my set but me.
What, do you run Hollywood now?
Two on the nose.
What is this?
We're filming the commercial for the brand new second generation Jeremy's Razor.
Yeah, I get it. We moved our manufacturing out of China. Plus, with the new Sprint 3 and Precision 5 blades, you can shave like a man, not a manifesto. But who's he?
I'm Black Jeremy, huge fan. You mind if we get a selfie?
Oh yeah, come on.
Look, we talked about this. Customers want diversity. Customers want inclusion. Customers want Black Jeremy.
And for the commercials to be less macho. Can we please lose the flamethrower and the car? It's overcompensating, and we need...
Who are you?
I'm Jessica. I've been following you around half naked for 2 years.
Oh, but that makes you some kind of expert on advertising? Besides, don't you think it's a little insulting to black people?
Oh, we prefer people of color.
Don't you think it's a little insulting to black people of color that instead of giving them their own roles to play, you just recast them as a beloved white character?
Hell yeah, it is.
We don't do it for people of color. We do it for liberal white women. I'll spell it out for you. Liberal white women make most of the purchasing decisions for the family, so happy commercials with people of color smiling at each other make them feel hella virtuous.
Bitches love to feel virtuous.
They do.
That's why there's no white people in commercials anymore?
Exactly.
But that's so...
Gay? Sorry, I'm the body positivity hire.
You are so brave.
What is even happening right now?
Think of all the razors you'll sell.
And don't forget Jeremy's shampoo and conditioner.
They are excellent products.
Hey, what if I play your character a little less bitchy?
Unbelievable. Jeremy's Razors isn't for liberal white women. It's for men. Conservative men. So stop giving your money to woke corporations who hate you. Give it to me instead.
Hey, liberal white ladies. You know what's up.
Go to jeremysrazors.com now and buy the new radically redesigned second-gen razors featuring sharper, longer-lasting blades and superior durability. Now in more inclusive 3- and 5-blade models.
We worked with the best engineers to bring you a truly top-quality razor that is not made in China. Today, we are proud to announce that not only have we brought you a new radically redesigned razor, and the second greatest commercial ever, but Generation 2 is now available for sale at Amazon. Selling on Amazon means reaching even more people who want to shave like a man, not a manifesto. Within hours of the second greatest commercial ever being released, Jeremy's Precision 5 razor became the #2 selling men's razor on Amazon. Every win is one more step in winning back the culture from the left. We can't do it without your support. Business is tough. Getting our products into retail happens in several steps. This is just the first one. In order to become Prime eligible on Amazon, we have to show Amazon the demand for our product. And that's where you come in. We need you to head on over to Amazon right now and make the Jeremy's Razor second generation razor the #1 men's razor on Amazon. Go make it happen right now. Okay, meanwhile, so the American Democratic Party reaction to everything that's going on in the Middle East has, of course, been wildly split between sort of the old school liberals in the Democratic Party who recognize that actually Israel is a democratic liberal state that shares Western values, and people on the left who believe that Israel is an oppressor, apartheid state, just like America is an oppressor state that stole land and all the rest of this. And you can see the split emerging in the Democratic Party. So on the one side, you have Democratic Senator Chris Coons. Of course, Coons is no great shakes when it comes to support for Israel, but at least he recognizes that Hamas is being rewarded by Ireland and by Norway and by Spain.
Let's be clear, Hamas is a hateful terrorist organization dedicated to killing Jews and destroying Israel. So that they put out a statement today cheering on these announcements by Spain and Norway and Ireland should suggest that this is not a constructive step at this time, and we should continue pressing for a two-state solution through negotiations.
Again, good luck with that, with the pressing for the two-state solution through negotiations. As it turns out, only one of those sides actually would like a peace deal, and that's the Israelis. And as everyone knows who's watched this conflict for any amount of time, if Israel put down all of its guns tomorrow, every Jew in the region would be dead. If the Palestinians put all their guns and their suicide bombs and their educational materials educating small children into a suicide cult down tomorrow, there would be peace in the region. In this particular conflict, at the very least. But the Democratic Party is indeed split. And so you have a split between the moderate liberals, who still mouth platitudes of support for the state of Israel, and the wild left. And they don't know what to do inside the Democratic Party. So Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, he has been pushing this gap in the Democratic Party, making it clear to Americans that there is this wide gap in the Democratic Party. And Democrats are now very angry about it. They're very angry. So you'll recall that in the middle of this conflict, Chuck Schumer decided that this was an amazing time to try to oust the sitting prime minister of the state of Israel. Again, not a move that he's ever made about, say, Vladimir Zelensky. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of a single time in the recent past that the United States has attempted to oust a democratically elected leader of an ally in a time of war. It's kind of an astonishing thing when you think about it. In the past, the United States has been party to a number of coups, including coups in allies, but never a democratically elected leader in an allied state. They've couped out democratically elected communists in non-allied states. We've couped out dictators in non-allied states or even in allied states, like South Korea, for example. But I really can't think of a single example where an allied state of the United States, the U.S. government tries to force out an elected leader in a time of war. Kind of an astonishing thing, actually. Well, now Mike Johnson is saying that Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, who is duly elected, that he should come and speak in front of Congress. And Democrats are fighting mad about it. Nancy Pelosi said no. Well, who gives a crap what she says? She's the minority leader. But this is creating a serious conflict inside the Democratic Party. So White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Wednesday the prime minister didn't speak to the White House about any speech. Apparently, Chuck Schumer is divided on it. Representative Dean Phillips said he thinks the invitation is a quote-unquote political gesture. Phillips said, I imagine the personal and political conflict facing Leader Schumer. Now, again, how many times can we have Vladimir Zelensky here to talk to the media and talk to the president and talk to Congress, but not have the elected leader of, the other allied state that has been significantly more of an ally historically to the United States than Ukraine has? I mean, Ukraine's a fairly new standing ally to the West. Kind of an amazing thing. And of course, that split is coming about because you have the Bernie Sanders wing of the party that really, in the end, wishes that the United States would side with Ireland, Norway, and Spain in basically just handing Hamas a state. Here's Bernie yesterday.
What do you make of Netanyahu coming to address Congress? Would you go to that?
It's a terrible idea. No, I won't go. Look, you have a prime minister who has created the worst humanitarian disaster in modern history. Israel, of course, had the right to defend itself against the Hamas terrorist attack. But what Netanyahu has done is gone to war against, all-out war, against the entire Palestinian people, women and children. 5% of the population is now dead or wounded. 60% of them are women and children. Some 200,000
He's just using Hamas
housing.
statistics. He's such a liar and a terrible person, Bernie. I don't need to listen to this old socialist dullard drain on society's resources. The worst person in the United States Senate, by far, Bernie Sanders. And he's just such a clown. He's such a clown. The fact that anybody takes him seriously shows how clownish our politics are. It's just a general matter. Using Hamas statistics and declaring that the war is somehow, Israel has a right to prosecute, but not to actually fight a war in which they have the best terrorist to civilian dead ratio in the history of urban warfare. Kind of amazing. But again, that's the split inside the Democratic Party. So Joe Biden is trying to bridge that split because he's afraid of losing votes from liberal Jewish Americans who don't like his stance on Israel particularly much. He's doing this by, of course, slandering Donald Trump. So he's now trying to claim that he is the force for light and goodness with regard to Jews in the United States. Weird, since all of your allies seem to be arrayed in favor of campus protesters who love Hamas. Here is Joe Biden. This is just pathetic. It really is.
What's next for America?
Is this on his official account? Wow. A unified Reich? That's Hitler's language. That's not America's. He cares about holding on to power. I care about you.
He cares about holding on to power. I care about you. That's Hitler's language. Okay, that is a reference to the myth that the Democrats are touting as of yesterday. They're out there selling this myth that Donald Trump is somehow attempting to create a unified Reich because he used a computer program, or somebody else he knows or doesn't know used a computer program to create an ad, and it had a headline that was blurred out that said unified Reich in it. That's his pitch. But everybody knows the truth, which is that in term two, Joe Biden would be significantly more pro-Hamas than he already is. And right now, again, the United States is engaged in negotiation tactics that are designed to prevent Israel from finishing off Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which would leave American hostages, including many of the people who you saw in those videos, in their hands. In fact, Project Veritas came out with a video yesterday showing Sterling Waters, a U.S. National Security Council advisor, explaining that Biden is only pretending to be somewhat pro-Israel for now. In term two, he'll just make the full turn.
You're not going to continue to lie and bomb and kill all these kids without facing serious consequences. But that is a second term decision to bend with, not a first term,
So we can't say now because he'll probably lose support from the Jews.
Enough support that we can't get 270 electoral votes.
So, again, he'll make the full turn. This is the split inside the Democratic Party. Again, the predictable, there may be, let's just assume good and noble intentions on the part of everyone for a second. The result is absolutely predictable, and Hamas knows it, which is the establishment of a terrorist state directed at the destruction of the state of Israel. That is the, in fact, goal of the Palestinians writ large. By polling data, they do not wish to live in side by side with Israel in peace. I wish that were the case. Israel certainly wishes that were the case. Everybody wishes that were the case, except apparently the Palestinian population, which continues to support Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, Islamic Jihad, and October 7th.
Hey, Ben, I've got something pretty random for you.
Okay, as per our usual.
Yep. So I've been watching a ton of post-apocalyptic shows, and I just need to pick your brain because there's been questions that have just been keeping me up all night long.
Alrighty. Give me the question.
Okay, so what would you deem your top priority survival gear?
Well, okay, so generally, if you wanted to out the fungus zombies or radioactive ghouls, here's a few things. Like you need some pure water, food, first aid, fire, some kind of self-defense, and navigation.
Okay, I've got a handful of those things, but definitely not all those.
Well, I have some good news for you because we have friends who can help you out over at My Patriot Supply. Most emergencies come without warning, and when the next one comes, you won't have a second to spare. You need to get ready right now before an emergency strikes. Your supplies should be within reach, ready to grab and go at a moment's notice. Secure those supplies at preparewithben.com. If you're unsure how to get started, check out their 4-week emergency food kit right now. You'll get $200 off your 3-month emergency supply. My Patriot Supply's 3-month emergency food supply provides those delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners that last up to 25 years in storage. The kits provide over 2,000 calories every day. They're simple to prepare. You add water and heat, and then you eat. And if you order by 3 p.m., your food kit will ship fast, free of charge on the same day. So invest in your safety and well-being by securing your food storage today. Go to preparewithben.com for $200 off your 3-month emergency supply. That's preparewithben.com, preparewithben.com. Well, unsurprisingly, Joe Biden continues to ride really low in the polls. According to a new swing states poll from Cook Political and GS Strategy Group, which is a Democratic Party group, and BSG, which is a Republican Party group, so it's sort of a bipartisan polling outfit, Donald Trump is now ahead quite heavily in many of the swing states. He's ahead by 9 in Nevada. When you include RFK Jr., he's up by 8. In Pennsylvania, he is up by 3, 48-45. In Georgia, he is up by 3. In North Carolina, he's up by 7. In Michigan, he is up by 2. In Arizona, he is up by 1. So that's a little closer than I think people would like it to be in the Republican Party. In Wisconsin, he is tied. So ain't none of these particularly good polls for Joe Biden, which means that Joe Biden's plan is to just pay people. He's just going to give out money. So yesterday, he did something. He's done this before. You remember before the midterm elections, he went on bended knee to Saudi Arabia and tried to beg them to lower the oil prices. Well, now he's going to try to do the same thing. The Biden administration said on Tuesday they are releasing 1 million barrels of gasoline from a Northeast reserve established after Superstorm Sandy in a bid to lower prices at the pump this summer. The sale from storage sites in New Jersey and Maine will be allocated in increments of 100,000 barrels at a time, which will create a competitive bidding process that ensures gasoline can flow into local retailers ahead of July 4th. So, as it turns out, that is just a political move. So we're going to get rid of that reserve in order to lower the prices ahead of the election for Joe Biden. You could have done this at any time. He didn't do it until now because, again, we are now heading toward the election and it's time to try to bribe the American people. He's also attempting to bribe young people once again. He's, quote unquote, canceling student loans for another 160,000 borrowers through a combination of existing programs. The Education Department announced the latest round of cancellation on Wednesday, saying it will raise $7.7 billion in federal student loans. With the latest action, the administration says it has now canceled $167 billion in student debt for nearly 5 million Americans through several programs. By the way, they didn't cancel the student debt. We just ate it. We, the taxpayers, ate the debt. So you got to pay for the douchebag's gender studies program who is at Columbia University. Congratulations to you. That is wonderful. The latest relief goes to borrowers in 3 categories who hit certain milestones, making them eligible for cancellation. It will go to 54,000 borrowers enrolled in Biden's new income-driven repayment program, along with 39,000 enrolled in earlier income-driven programs, and about 67,000 who are eligible through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So he's just the Supreme Court literally said you can't do this, so he's just doing it. Don't worry, it's Donald Trump who's the threat to the Republic. But it turns out that bribery is not going to get you there. It's not going to get you there. And the Republican Party continues to consolidate around Donald Trump. Yesterday, Nikki Haley came out and endorsed Donald Trump.
As a voter, I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border, no more excuses, a president who would support capitalism and freedom, a president who understands we need less debt, not more debt. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump.
Okay, so everybody decided on the left to now attack Nikki Haley because, again, you're the hero of the moment so long as you don't support the candidate against Joe Biden. When she said she was going to support Trump, which, of course, was sort of inevitable given the fact he's the Republican nominee running against the worst president of my lifetime, bar none, in Joe Biden, everybody sort of went nuts. Now, on the right, you are seeing smart people like J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio. I have disagreements with Senator Vance, but he's a smart politician and a very bright guy. And he immediately came out and said, we welcome Nikki Haley's support. It's a mistake for people on the right to yell at Nikki Haley. Oh, my God. She's on your side now. And it's good for Donald Trump's campaign that she is on Donald Trump's side. She will bring in people who are wavering, who are in her camp. That is very good for Donald Trump. So the base continues to consolidate around Trump. A lot of coming home voters. And meanwhile, Joe Biden doesn't have even a base to consolidate. It's falling apart on him, which means that the efforts to get Donald Trump arrested as some sort of last-ditch gambit to stop his election, those continue apace. AOC, the venerable intellect, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who wears smart people glasses sometimes, and then when she's really, really into it, she puts them up on the top of her head like this. She says, the quiet part out loud, that they basically are putting Trump in a legal version of an ankle bracelet to stop him from running.
By the way, he's doing it in the South Bronx not to make a point, but because he's got court. And the man practically has the legal version of an ankle bracelet around him, and he can't leave the 5 boroughs because he always has to be in court. And so it is truly an embarrassment to him.
Okay, well, I mean, I understand that you guys would love it if he couldn't campaign. The reality is all that's backfiring, by the way. It is not actually going to work because people already have their opinions of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump reminds them of his worst excesses, it'll be a hard election for him. If he doesn't, he's going to win. That's just the way it is. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show continues right now. We'll be getting into Bill Maher visiting The View and clocking some folks. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.